Hey guys, this is Dagon123, and welcome to
Tenchicast!
Hello everyone, and welcome to the next exciting episode of Tenchicast, presented by Tenchiforum.com. Tenchi Muyo has had a small release of games, the majority of which were very simplistic and all in the Sega Saturn. But the game that every Tenchi fan thinks of when Tenchi Muyo and game are said in the same sentence is Tenchi Muyo Game-hen. Today with me I have a fantastic cast. Chuck.
We now return to your regularly scheduled Tenchicast.
Pi.
What's up, yo?
And JG.
I'm back. Did you miss me?
First and foremost, did you enjoy the game when you played it?
Oh, well, that's probably the easiest question I've ever been asked in a Tenchicast, and the answer is unequivocally yes. It was certainly a different experience from most games that I've played, but that's mainly because I never really played too many Super Nintendo games, and that is what this game was released on, or the Japanese version, which is the Super Famicom, but it's the same thing. I did really enjoy it. It was fun to actually play a game with all the Tenchicast members there, and to be able to explore more facets of the show's backstory. Not so much backstory of the show itself, but things that never really get shown in the show, like some characters that are brand new show up, and there's a whole story that only happens in the game. So it's like a brand new episode of Tenchi, but you get to play it and it's customizable. And it's a really fun experience. And I think every Tenchi fan out there who has the ability should definitely play the game, because it is very fun to actually not just watch a Tenchi adventure, but be part of it yourself. And so I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was well worth anyone's time, especially if they're a Tenchi fan.
I have an interesting experience with this game. When I played first, it was back in 97, 98, 99, right around there, when I first went to college, and I got a hold of the ROM, got an emulator. I think this was actually before the game was patched into English. So all of the menus when I first played the game were in Japanese. So I had to figure out what the hell was going on and what each command meant, and it was very much a puzzle just to figure out how the game worked. But I stuck with it because Tenchi's my thing, and when every little thing I figured out was a victory. It was glorious. I got Tenchi to move around the thing, and especially the thing that surprised me the most is when I started leveling the characters up, and they got new techniques. When I first saw Tenchi whip out the Lighthawk wings and nuke the entire screen, I was like, yes! And increasingly so, there's several hidden characters in the game. You can get Azaka and Kamidake, the two guardians. You can get Yukunojo, of all characters, as a playable character. And you get just about the entire main cast in your party. The gameplay is very much reminiscent of Final Fantasy Tactics. It's a tactical turn-based RPG. Characters level up, they learn new techniques. You have to arrange characters in a rectangular battle grid with different obstacles like pits of water, pits of air, vacant space, a whole lot of other things. It's very, very interesting gameplay. I think it's a simplified version of Final Fantasy Tactics. For example, you don't really have a class system. The characters are pretty much set in what techniques they learn. You can't like mix and match techniques, but all in all, the gameplay itself is very, very fun for me. The plot was actually very interesting, as Chuck alluded to earlier. It's very much another chapter of Tenchi Muyo. If you are very much in love with the story, please play the English version unless you know Japanese, and you get another episode of Tenchi, but this one is much more interactive. You get to choose which locations you go to, in which order you go to, and the plot actually changes depending upon minorly, depending upon which locations you go to, and that can affect which characters you pick up at what times.
Well, I did enjoy it quite a bit. It's not a game to be necessarily taken lightly, because you will end up dying in several spots pretty frequently, depending on how you've set up your loadout. And like Chuck and Pi said, there is a pretty good variety of characters. I went with kind of a heavy set, Yosho and Zaka and Ryoko type build and stuff with that in it. But even then, you still get pretty well kicked down. So it's got a good difficulty level. It's got that classic kind of feel to it. The graphics for being sprite based are really good too. There's a lot of variety in the backgrounds and some of the videos and stuff that make it look really good for its age. The music in it was pretty good. I'd have to say the story is very similar to a chapter or section of the manga. It feels very much like a gameized version of that. You've also got a little bit of the Daughter of Darkness movie in there, a little bit, it feels like, because you're pulling from the universe cast of characters. And it's kind of got the whole Yazuha and Mayuka thing going for it with enemies. It's a good game, and I enjoyed it. I did spend probably about 11, 12 hours, I guess, to run through it in one shot. So yeah, I'd say if you are a diehard Tenchi fan, it would be a good thing to try and set up in an emulator, which really isn't all that hard these days.
I personally, just like everybody else here, I enjoyed the game. It is much different than any other Tenchi game in that it is arguably actually a game. The majority of other Tenchi games, if you didn't know there were other Tenchi games, the majority of them came out on the Sega Saturn, which with, odds and ends coming out on the PC Engine or the PCFX or PlayStation and whatnot. But the majority of those were dating sim like games, and there's definitely some fun to be had there. They're very interesting and very unique games as far as that is concerned. But and I believe there's also another game in there that is a knockoff, or I guess I'd say a copy of a simple arcade game called Puyo Puyo, which has made its way over here to the West in the form of Kirby's Avalanche and other stuff. But there are other avenues for it. But this Tenchi game in particular, was actually very well fleshed out. It's in the same vein as Final Fantasy Tactics, as Pi said, so of course if you're a fan of that, you'll enjoy that. And like JG said, the writing for it is very, you feel like you're playing an episode of Tenchi, and it's very enjoyable in the way that it presents itself. It looks very good for as long as it's been around, and I definitely enjoyed it. It was the one game out of all of the Tenchi ones that you can actually go back to multiple times and really enjoy yourself. What about Game-hen stands out to you over everything else in Tenchi?
Oh, goodness. Well, the first one was easy. This one is not easy. It's the complete package. Like it really is. You've got, like JG was alluding to earlier, you got a lot of everything. Like you've got dabbings of Daughter of Darkness. You've got some shades of the manga in there. It's ostensibly set in the OVA universe, I believe, but yet at the same time, it's got some universe characters in it as well. So it's really the complete package for Tenchi. As for like what makes the game itself stand out to me, in Tenchi, is just the customizability of it all. Like you can play, it's a relatively short game. You can play through it in one sitting in maybe 2 hours, but you'd be missing out on so much because you don't need to get all the you don't need to unlock all the characters, and neither do you need to level up all the characters. But if you actually put the time in and collect all the characters, I think there's 10 or 12, because all the main cast and then several side characters. So you can collect them all, and they all have their own special abilities and perks. But the real fun is actually leveling them all up to get to their final level, and to unlock their final ultimate move. And each one has their own unique move, and it's really a surprise for a lot of them. Some of them are pretty cool and what you would expect. Like Tenchi, when he gets to level 10, he can use the Lighthawk wings and seriously wreck things up on the game board. But others are slightly more humorous. Like Sasami, when you get her to level 10, she can become pretty Sammy, the magical girl, and use her powers that way. And Mahoshi can call in an airstrike from Kiyone in an airship. So it's really fun to unlock all the extra stuff, because you can put in the time and make it a really thorough, long-lasting game. And that's what really makes it stand out for me. Is just one, the customizability, and two, the overall complete package of the game. It is the complete Tenchi Muyo package in game form. and it's got such good replay value, like Dagon said. So those are the reasons that make it stand out to me.
What makes the game stand out to me is the fact that it is a game. It is very interactive. It's something that you yourself touched on a moment ago, Dagon, is that you get to really interact with the characters. You get to control the characters, move them around the game board, control the way the battle goes, and actually, as you level up and switch your characters in and out, you actually control how certain parts of the story progress. So it's not just that you're playing and experiencing a Tenchi chapter, you're also in many ways controlling how a lot of this goes. So it's allowing you to have direct access to the director's chair of a story and say, okay, let's try doing this package and see this way. For example, I mean, as Chuck mentioned a moment ago, you could have a heavy loadout and have Tensha Ryoko and Zaka and probably Katsuhito and just blow through the game really, really fast. What's the fun in that if you can't have a little side fun here and there? Have a party that's Ryuoki, to the Guardians, and Ayaka go into combat and see how that pans out. A little bit of a warning here: don't spend your time with a couple particular characters. You might regret it later. There's a lot of things that you don't learn about the game until later on in it, and depending upon how you've min-maxed your characters, you may regret it. It's actually a very good strategy game as well. Again, I allude to Final Fantasy Tactics, but also Super Robot Wars is a similar style game. And that's what actually stands out to me, is that it is kind of an intricate game where you have to pay attention to not just the plot of the story, but also where your characters are and how you develop them along the way.
I think overall the amount of polish that was put into the game, because being as somebody who grew up with the SNES era or the Famicom, a lot of games, there are very few in the catalog that had a great deal of effort put into them. In other words, a lot of it was just retiled environments and stuff like that. Here they took a lot of effort to make every environment different. Every environment have its own enemy group. Every character have its own attacks. Every character have upgradable options. Every, like I said, environment was interesting. You go from inside of Tenchi's house to all over the entire Tenchi mountainside, from like the carrot fields to the onsen to Yosho ship tree that's out in the lake. There's a bunch of different places all on that map, and then you can end up in Ryooki. You can end up on different locations in space. And all of them have some kind of like graphical effect going on the floor. All of them have some kind of thing going in the background. It overall is just, they polished and polished and polished, and they put some effort into it. And you've got dialogue constantly popping up. So it's not like they skimped on any particular area to say that it's lacking. The whole thing as a whole package was well done. One of the enemy characters is kind of weak in the end game, so to speak, but again, it has to be taken as a whole package, and in that regard, it's pretty stellar. Also to note is that for people that are trying, hearing what Pie's talking about in regards to games that is similar to, the most common, probably modern game would be XCOM Enemy Unknown, with its kind of tile-based combat where you have to get up close to an enemy to actually be in attack range. You get your turn to attack after you move, so it's very similar to that.
The one thing that definitely stood out to me more than anything was just kind of what JG had just touched on, was the amount of work and the amount of polish that they put into the game. Like, coming from a Western perspective, 99% of the games that we get that are tied into a TV show or tied into a movie are pretty bad. Like, they, not necessarily in that they're bad games, although a lot of them are bad games, but you can tell that they were rushed out as quick as humanly possible to get the game out there, to monetize the name, to get, essentially to cash in on it. This game is not one of those games. The amount of work that went into this game was an incredible amount of work. One thing that Borderline, who is the person who finished the 100% translation of the game, said, he said that the coding was sloppy when he went in to finish it, because he was also partly a game coder, which is why he went through and did what he did. But I mean, I've seen I've played the game in 3 different incarnations. I played it in Japanese a little bit. I played it when LNF did their translation, and I did Borderlines 100%. And even then, while the game did get a little bit more stable when Borderline went in and fixed things, the game still played fine with LNF's translation, which didn't touch the coding at all. The game is incredibly, incredibly polished for not only that time period, but for the amount of work that went into it. It's really incredible that they put that much into it. But back to the story, it's not like mind-blowingly original as far as like Tenchi stories are concerned, but considering the new characters that were added to it and what their parts are, and the fact that they didn't just throw in, here's a bad guy, here's the good guys, blah blah blah, that they actually kind of thought it out a little bit. And there's just a little bit of depth. It's not a crazy amount, it's not something that'll get you contemplating existential planes, but it will definitely, there's definitely cool parallels between Shitsuki and Kusumi and Washu and Ryoko that you see come out a number of times, and we'll get to those characters in a second. Game-hen introduces us to 2 brand new characters who only appear in this single game and not anywhere else in Tenchi, Shitsuki and Kusumi. What are your thoughts on them?
Well, like you said, Dagon, it's cool that they're brand new characters, and the story is not like super depth. Like you're not getting into an OVA style game here, so it's not super deep. But they're very interesting characters, and like you alluded to, it's very similar. They have a relationship that's somewhat analogous to Washu and Ryoko. Kusumi is I think she's a former colleague of Washu or something at the Galaxy Science Academy, and she's come to sort of take revenge on Washu, I guess, for some slight in the past. And so she has the other character, Shitsuki, is sort of a Ryoko type character. She's been created by Kusumi to help aid her in this attack on the Tenchi household, but Shitsuki is she's a lot more lighthearted than just a regular old attack drone. She goofs around, she makes jokes. She's an all around fun character to go up against, and eventually, not to spoil anything, but there are parts where you do have to work together as much as you have to work against her, and it's really fun to incorporate these characters into the cast, and they do fit for a game. They fit perfectly fine. It's you're not getting Kageto levels of character development here, but they fit. They click with the cast, and it's funny to see some of the headbutting going on between Ryoko and Shitsuki and Washu and Kusumi. And so I thought they were very fun characters, and this was a game after all. Fun more than depth.
I rather liked Shitsuki as a character. She was pretty much a bubbly, very active character. She played a very good foil to Ryoko, who, in many instances, when she's not verbally sparring or actually sparring with Ayaka, Ryoko tends to be kind of more on the serious end about some certain things in this story. On the other hand, Shitsuki is, as Chuck mentioned, is cracking jokes, making quips, and this, that, and the other. Being genre specific, maybe she shouldn't quip so much. Actually, and Kusumi is very much a good foil to Washu. She's the rival trying to upstage her colleague and so on. The parallels are very similar to Yuzuha and Mayuka, especially in the relationship between Kusumi and Shitsuki. However, the relationship, as far as like how they're portrayed in the game, is closer to being like Yume and the Shima brothers in the manga, because Shitsuki it willingly and knowingly goes after Washu and the Washu Tenchi and so on in the household under Kusumi's orders. It's not until other things happen that, well, the relationship gets more in depth. But she's very much targeted. She goes in there, does her thing. She goofs around, but her combative style is very much more. It has less defense than Ryoko's. She takes her character. It actually her character play style reflects her personality rather dramatically. She has very little defense, but her offense is off the charts. Ryoko's offense is fairly high as well, even early on, but her defense is higher. She can take more damage than it seems that Shitsuki could. Again, you have a lot of parallels between the two of them, as well as parallels to other characters that are in the series. Seeing that particular mix of personalities in this actually makes me interested to see if anyone, director or writer, could incorporate these two characters into the series, possibly opposite Yume and the Shima brothers, to essentially give Washu some more colleagues.
Tsuki really, to me, was kind of annoying through most of the game because she just drops in and will sometimes do some damage and then pop right out as far as gameplay goes. At that point in the game, I had really used Ryoko heavily, so, without spoiling anything, can't really say too much there, but, let your mind wander. Their relationship-wise reminds me of, like I'd said earlier and Pai said, the whole Yuzuha and Mayuka comparison. There's also another one, is Dr. Clay and Zero, so that theme just keeps popping up over and over and over. Tenchi is creator and marionette. For Kusumi, she seems a little bit more like Yuzuha, both in appearance and, deed a little bit. She's, little conniving person that's trying to get back at Washu, similar to how Yuzuha went after Yosho and Tenchi. You could also draw a little bit of a parallel to El Hazard, maybe a little bit, with Tor and her aide. So, they were alright. They serve their purpose as far as it goes. They could pop up in some other media at some point, and I don't think it would disturb things too much. Like I said, they fit with the manga, I think, more so than anywhere else, because this is kind of a mishmash of universe, OVA, other things.
The first thing you see when the game loads is Shitsuki dancing. Now, of course, we're all saying Shitsuki, but one of the things that you may not know, again, if you were an older fan, is that with the original translation, which was incomplete by LNF, they translated her name as Mitsuki, but her name is in fact Shitsuki. I translated the manual. It is there, believe it or not. One thing I found interesting is that when I translated the manual and was going over everybody's names, is that their two names in particular they're odd in how they're presented, because both Shitsuki and Kusumi are not first names. They're not, first names in Japanese. They're very odd in the Japanese language. And you'll notice that quite a bit through Tenchi in general, is that Shitsuki's name is actually named after a place. This place is the Shitsuki district in Okayama Prefecture. Many other characters in Tenchi were named after places in Okayama Prefecture or around there, and you're probably going to ask yourself, what about Okayama Prefecture is important to this? Well, the Masaki Shrine is in, or said to be in, Okayama Prefecture. In fact, I think Ryoko's actual cave is there, so that's the connection, in that Shitsuki district is what they almost unanimously named Shitsuki after, because they did that with a lot of other characters in Tenchi. I don't know a whole lot about Kusumi as far as exactly where she's from. Again, though, her first name is not a first name, so Kusumi is more used as a last name, and so I was looking around trying to figure out what her connection was, because if Shitsuki has one, she more than likely has one, and the only two things I could find were, one, that her name was based off of the famous Japanese painter Kusumi Morikage, who, and this is kind of where I drew that connection, was he is known as an excellent painter of drawing farmers and common people, which would be a slight nod to Tenchi being a farm boy and farming carrots. Or it could be a reference to the Kusumi lab at Kyoto University, which would make sense because Kusumi is a scientist. Kyoto University, Kusumi lab, like Washu, she's a scientist. I don't have any clear tie to that. Those are just the two things that I found that I thought were, could be nice nods to her name, because her name, she's obviously named after something. Just what that is in particular, I'm not sure. Both of the characters I really enjoyed. When I first saw Shitsuki, I thought she was going to be kind of like a Sasami-like character, but she's much more like a Ryoko, if not even more mischievous, because she pops in and she does things with malice, but she doesn't, or not even really malice, she just does things that hurt people, but she doesn't necessarily do it because she enjoys it. She does it because she's told to, but obviously she's the type of person that, well, while I'm here, I might as well enjoy it. She's a really unique character. Kusumi, on the other hand, is literally a female version of Dr. Clay, except she doesn't suck as much as Dr. Clay does. You know, she actually has a little bit more going for her than Dr. Clay, but you'll notice a little bit like I believe it's the logo on the front of her hat. It's kind of like kind of the same thing that Dr. Clay did, but in that it's a unique symbol for her. But I liked both of the new characters. I thought they really added to it. And an interesting note is that in the game, Shitsuki is voiced by the Japanese seiyuu who was the voice of Nagi in Tenchi Universe. So that it's an interesting two characters that were added to a game that, for all intents and purposes, was sort of to be a tie-in to the series. And now we are going to open up to general discussion.
Dagon, you just reminded me. I forgot to mention, for all those out there listening, the game actually does have voices in it because there's audio, and each character has a voice, and the voices of the characters, all of them, are their original Japanese voice actors from the show itself. So that's another really cool little thing a nice touch that they added in there. So when you hear Ryoko shout her battle cry in Japanese, of course, it is the voice of Ayasa, Ryoko's voice actress in Japan, and same with all the other characters. So it's another really cool touch that they added in the game. It just adds that whole another level of connectedness with the rest of Tenchi.
Because on the Super Famicom, you were limited by the cart size. I mean, if you look at games like Super Metroid and what have you, 16 megabit cartridges were a thing for the time, and to have even limited voice acting. I mean, you don't have like full on all the text is actually spoken throughout the game, but you have, again, like little character voiced clips here and there for different scenes, for when you select a particular character, when they get wounded, that kind of thing. That took up some space on the card to actually get that in high enough fidelity to recognize their voices, and that is a nice touch. Along with as JG and company have said earlier, the art was made very, very unique for this game to make it very applicable to the Tenchi continuities.
I think one thing that's pretty interesting is that Tenchi, for as long as it was around, it's interesting that no other... I mean, they did make a lot of games in that, you know, they went the dating sim game route, but Tenchi has the ability to kind of branch out. Like, it could be a whole number of different games. I think RPG works well for Tenchi because of just each of the characters could be a different class. You could have Sasami, she's the healer. You have Tenchi, he's the fighter or the warrior. You've got Ryoko, who is kind of a...
battle mage.
Yeah, she could be a battle mage. And then you have Washu, who could be the mage, the dark mage, whatever. There's definitely a lot of areas that you could play. And I mean, hell, even when they did the Goku Raku CDs, which were... Goku Raku is kind of like information CDs. They were like encyclopedia type games that... And if you were a kid in the 90s in the US, you got a boatload of those for old, Windows 3.1 and 95 and stuff. So... but the reference to that is on the front of those games, and in those games, they have cells and pictures of the Tenchicast in, like, swords and sorcery type armor. So the idea that they could be, in RPGs has been around for a long time, especially on the Japanese side of things. It also helped the Lotus War was coming around at the same time. But... there's definitely a lot of areas that Tenchi could go in as far as games are concerned, and I personally would like to see another RPG. I'd love to see a sequel to Game-hen 2, because it's just fun. You can come back to it, and it's modern games like JG pointed out, which I'm glad you pointed out, because it is a good comparison, is XCOM. XCOM is addictive as all get out, and I think that a sequel... I don't know if I want to see the sprites go away, because... it would really depend on how it was done, but I think that a a fleshed out modern sequel to the first game, the first Game-hen in the style of XCOM with Tenchi. I think that could really be something.
On that note, what type of other games, taking maybe what you've learned or enjoyed from this, maybe besides the RPG type style, would you like to see Tenchi to perhaps branch out to besides what we've seen portrayed in Game-hen?
Tenchi Racing.
Oh goodness,
race all the
yes.
starships.
Oh god,
I'd have
yes.
to be like Crash Bandicoot Racing.
Mario Kart, some craziness like that.
But you could do it in the same vein as Wipeout. I think that was the one that had like the floating ships. You could do something in that vein and kind of have it, like race around planets or race around universal, race around the galaxy a little bit or something. Have that be like the Rainbow Road. But you could definitely do that because each of the characters, like Ryoko has Ryo-Oki, Mihoshi and Kione have the Yagami, Nagi has her ship, Kenoki, Sasami has Tsunami. Aika has Funao.
Aika, Ryu.
I mean, they all have ships, so you could absolutely do a racing game. How it would probably make people laugh, like, oh my god, this is the game they went with. But I mean, you could do it.
Sims Muyo.
It's funny because The Sims not too long ago, a couple years back, started branching out and doing things based on particular situations. Like they had Sims Medieval and Sims Pirates. You could do that. You could make a Sims Tenchi because then you could make the entire game based around something. Because I know people have made mods, especially for Sims 2. They made mods for like the hair and the body style and whatnot of the girls, like Washu and Ryoko and stuff. But you could do that. You could have a Sims Tenchi Muyo, and kind of have like the base of the game based around happenings in Tenchi, so that way you would have the sim thing that everybody loves, but then you'd also have kind of a story going on, or like an end game goal that would kind of fit towards Tenchi. So that'd be a good idea.
Actually, we've talked periodically about transferring like one medium of Tenchi to another. For example, like taking the manga and making it animated. That was discussed. We've also chatted about the novels periodically. I think it'd be kind of interesting especially the way Game-hen portrays the characters this way, the way they are in this sprite-based medium. If you were to take, say, a chapter of the manga, like the introduction of Minagi, or the battle with Yakage, or hell, the entire Frelling Yume arc, and essentially make that into an RPG, much like the one that they have here, or possibly more towards a more turn-based or active time turn-based RPG, much more like the more classic Final Fantasies or Saga or any of those RPGs. I mean, that way you can actually get a nice little storyline, as well as introducing people to perhaps chapters of things that they haven't seen or read or had access to.
I could totally go for a turn-based strategy game a la Sid Meier's Civilization or Alpha Centauri, where you play as one of the civilizations in Tenchi, having to expand your territory, negotiate with like pirates and shit, and like declaring war and making peace and all that. That'd be kind of fun. I could see that working.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a battler, a 2D style battler like Gundam Battle Assault, or actually there was one on the SNES done to the vein of Street Fighter that was Gundam Wing Endless Duel, which would have been similar. So I'm surprised that actually never came out of the gate.
The 2D fighting thing has been something that a lot of people have wanted to do just because of the sheer size of games like Street Fighter and just how long it's been around. But I think one of the reasons they never went for that was because despite the show having a lot of action in it, it was never really oriented towards fighting. It was oriented more towards what was going on, like the plot and the romance and stuff like that. It's funny because a lot of times that wouldn't be a problem until it came over here. Hence why there were problems with Poison coming over in Final Fight, was because apparently it was okay. But I think one thing that would work for Tenchi as a platformer, because it's adventure based. The first thing I think of is the one episode where they're on Jirai and Tenchi is cross dressing. It sounds crazy, but he's running around, he's hitting people, and he's adventuring. That's kind of the adventure story is kind of something that's always been with Tenchi. It's been a facet of Tenchi, and one of the best ways to portray that, and also still get in a little bit of action, but also still be able to tell a story, is a platformer, because there's a whole realm of things you could do with that, and I think of the fights with Kagato, both of them. You could look at that and say, well, especially the universe Kagato fight, that big board, the big throne room and the fighting, and Aika's off in the corner. It sets itself up, I think, really well to be done in a 2D platformer type role, because it's kind of made for it, and you could work it really well that way, I think.
Oh, I could totally see that. Something like the old Zelda games. Oh man, I could see it. I could just see it now. Like Tenchi meeting with Yosho in the room, and Yosho saying, "It's dangerous to go alone, Tenchi. Take this," handing him the Tenchi Ken, and setting forth to explore space. Oh, so much fun.
I was actually going to mention that like a puzzle platformer or an action RPG like Zelda would actually be somewhat appropriate.
I think too that we're moving from the age of 2D and 3D into personal 3D, I guess you could call it, with the Oculus Rift and motion controls being the mainstays, I guess, of our generation. It'd be interesting. You mentioned the throne room fight. What if you did that first person and you had a PlayStation Move controller in your hand instead of a Tenchiken? So, there's different ways of thinking about that too.
I had kind of thought about that, but it's interesting because as big as Tenchi is, I don't know if it would be able to retain. I mean, if the line of thought is like something on the level of like Fallout or Oblivion or the Elder Scrolls games, I don't think it has enough in it to warrant able to make a full game out of that. Do I think that having duels like that, kind of in the same vein as, although not to the same crappy degree, the lightsaber fighting games in Star Wars, I think you could do something like that, absolutely. But I don't think a full fleshed out game in the first person would necessarily work. You could get a lot of other things into it. You could work in, like for instance, the reason so many dating sim games were made was, because it was, who's Tenchi gonna get with? He's got all these girls. You could definitely explore in the first person stuff like that, doing quests for characters to kind of get them to like you more, to help you on an adventure or whatever. This is just me personally, and this is a discussion for another time. I don't think that I think VR is a little bit farther off than people give it credit for, but I think as far in the first person realm, you could do it. I think Tenchi could be done that way. It would just not be. You wouldn't put 100 hours into the game, and in the same way that there's 100 hours to get out of it.
Well, here's a thought, and I'll throw this out there, although it's probably going to be slightly long-winded. But if you take the VR element of it and say you're first person, let's say that you get assigned to be a person as to one of the many factions in the universe, and eventually you can work your way up to get a spaceship or get on board a spaceship or be as part of the GXP or whatever. You could potentially, I would be thinking more towards like a MMORPG, something crossed between the state of, say, Sword Art and Sims, and something else where your like special event in the universe is Kagato wiping out some planets, or Jirai doing something, or so forth. You could add in, say, you need to buff up your character, whatever, much like Skyrim does, and farm carrots. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I don't think there's enough there, like you said, to maybe tie it together as an overall package, but there's plenty of things to do. And if you combined all the different verses, so to speak, between Duel and Photon and Sakishi and the different Tenchi variants, El Hazard, I think I said already. So if you combine all those and made them different worlds that you could go and visit, or like flip a switch and hop dimensions back and forth, and your actions played a role in the overall universe, it could be compelling.
Absolutely. Does there anybody have any last words they want to throw out there?
Real quick, getting back to Game-hen, just the friendly word of advice, players: diversify your teams, because you will need it later on. You can't just power through on 2 or 3 characters.
Actually, as an added bit of advice, level up Ayaka first.
You will be doing yourself a lot of favors in doing that.
Trust me, having Tenchi and Ryoko as your mainline fighters, good idea. Ayaka is your only healer for a long time.
Thank you everybody for being a part of episode 21, No Need for Tenchi Muyo Game-hen. If you like what we do, come join the discussion over at Tenchiforum.com. And subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on iTunes, Tumblr, Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media outlet you decide to use. And if you are a translator or someone who knows Japanese, we are always looking for help working on our projects, and we have a very special project that we have in the works, and it will be coming out at some point in the near determined future, and the more people we get, the faster those come out. Until next time, stay gold.